The last thing I remember before the night shattered was Martha's face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. Her diamond necklace trembled as she pointed a shaking finger at the empty chair beside me. "Who is going to pay for this?" she screamed. All 70 guests turned to stare, their whispers echoing loudly in the grand sapphire ballroom, eyes wide with shock. They thought I was the one in trouble, but they had no idea I was already 3 miles away, leaving her precious son with a debt that would completely destroy him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, when I was still blissfully unaware in Chicago. I thought I had it all figured out. My life wasn't always this complicated. I grew up in a modest neighborhood on the South Side. My parents worked tirelessly just to keep the lights on, so I learned the value of $1 early on. I worked my way up, built a solid career, and then I met David. He was charming, attentive, and everything I ever wanted. We bought a beautiful house near the lake, and for the first few years, it felt like a perfect dream. But there was always a dark cloud hanging over us, and her name was Martha. David's mother was a woman who believed her family name was royalty. She never missed a chance to remind me that I didn't belong in her pristine world. "Clara, are you sure you know which fork to use for the salad?" she'd ask, her eyes looking me up and down with absolute disgust. David would always just brush it off. "That's just how Mom is, Clara, just ignore it," he would say. But it wasn't just harmless comments. Then came the announcement of her 40th wedding anniversary. Martha decided she needed a grand gala to celebrate her so-called legacy. And somehow, the responsibility of paying the $8,000 bill fell entirely on my shoulders. "Since David is focusing on his new business ventures, it's only right that you handle the venue, Clara," she announced at Sunday dinner. $8,000. That was the money David and I were saving for our future. I looked at David across the table, waiting for him to defend me, but he just stared at his plate. Later that night, I begged him to reconsider. "David, we can't afford this right now," I pleaded. But he just held my hands and sighed. "It's just this one time, Clara, please, let's just keep the peace." So, I agreed. I wrote the check. Looking back, I realize exactly why I did it. In psychology, there is something called the sunk cost fallacy. When you invest so much of your heart, your time, and your money into a relationship, you convince yourself to just endure a little more. You tell yourself, "I've tried this hard, if I just bite my tongue this time, everything will be fine." But endurance without boundaries doesn't build respect. It just sends a very clear message to toxic people: I can be used. A narcissist doesn't look at your sacrifice and see love, they look at your sacrifice and see a weakness they can exploit. I thought I was buying peace. I thought paying for that ridiculous gala would finally earn my place in their family. I didn't realize that my silence was the exact weapon they were using to destroy me. Over the next 2 months, I threw myself into planning. I booked the Grand Sapphire, arranged the catering, and paid for the custom floral centerpieces Martha demanded. I was exhausted, draining my own accounts while David was supposedly working late every single night. "I'm doing this for us," I kept whispering to myself. I was funding the illusion of a perfect family, completely unaware that my own marriage was rotting from the inside out. For weeks before the gala, the pressure was suffocating me. I was managing caterers, confirming guest lists, and writing checks that made my stomach churn. David was barely home. He said his new business venture was demanding all his time, that he was doing this for our future. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But 2 weeks before the party, the first crack appeared. It was a Tuesday morning, and David was rushing to catch a flight for a so-called investor meeting. He left his new smartwatch sitting on the bathroom counter. I wouldn't have even looked at it, but my tablet chimed from the bedroom. For some reason, his watch had just synced with our shared iCloud account. I picked up my tablet just to clear the notifications, but the screen froze me in my tracks. It wasn't an email from an investor. It was a digital receipt from a hidden credit card account I had no idea existed. And the charge? $2,000 at a luxury jeweler downtown. My heart started pounding against my ribs. We were draining our savings to pay for his mother's $8,000 anniversary party, and he was dropping thousands on jewelry? I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a surprise gift for me, maybe it was a grand gesture for Martha's anniversary. But my hands were shaking as I clicked on the linked billing statement. There were months of hidden charges. $400 at a high-end lingerie boutique. $300 for a private couples spa day. Countless dinners at romantic restaurants across the city, all while I was sitting at home eating leftovers, crunching numbers to keep us afloat. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen as if it were a venomous snake. Then, another notification popped up on the synced display. It was a text message. Thinking about our future. I can't wait until you finally tell her. The sender didn't have a name saved, just a single initial. S. A cold chill washed over my entire body. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a parallel life. David wasn't working late to build our future, he was actively draining our present to fund a completely different reality. When he called me from the airport an hour later, his voice was so smooth, so casually affectionate. "Hey honey, boarding now, I love you," he said. I closed my eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. "Have a safe flight, David," I replied, my voice eerily calm. I hung up the phone, and in that quiet, empty house, something inside me permanently snapped. I wasn't just going to sit there and cry. I was going to find out exactly who S was, and I was going to dig up every single secret he was hiding. That afternoon, while David was supposedly miles away at his investor meeting, I sat at my laptop and started digging. I guessed his master password on the third try. It was his mother's maiden name, of course. The hidden credit card I saw on the watch was just a tiny fraction of the truth. I found a secure folder of bank statements he had kept completely concealed from me for over a year. I started scrolling through the transactions, my eyes scanning line after line of deceit. There were massive wire transfers to a commercial leasing company downtown. We are talking about tens of thousands of dollars just disappearing into thin air. I traced the business name attached to the transfers, typing it into the state registry database. When the results popped up, my stomach instantly dropped to the floor. The LLC was registered to Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, my own distant cousin. She was the girl my parents had taken in when she had nowhere else to go, the one who sat at our dinner table for years. I hadn't seen her in 3 years because she claimed she was moving out of state for a fresh start. Yet here she was, secretly living off my husband's bank account right here in Chicago. But the nightmare didn't stop there. I found another subfolder labeled with our home address. I clicked on it, my hands trembling so hard I could barely control the mouse. A heavy document loaded on the screen, and I stopped breathing entirely. It was a loan agreement. David had forged my signature on a stack of legal documents. He had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on our beautiful lake house. He leveraged the very home I worked 50 hours a week to pay the down payment for, just to open a luxury boutique for his mistress. When people talk about domestic abuse, they usually picture physical violence and bruises. But there is a kind of trauma that doesn't leave visible marks on your skin. It is called silent financial abuse. It happens when the person you share a bed with secretly drains your shared assets, taking your blood and sweat to feed their own selfish secrets. It is not just about the theft of physical money, it is the complete destruction of your most basic sense of safety and trust. The abuser creates the perfect illusion of a loving partner, cooking you dinner and kissing you goodnight, making you question your own intuition every single day. The most sickening part isn't the financial loss itself, it is the terrifying reality that someone you love has been coldly and consciously planning your ruin for months. They sit across from you at the breakfast table, smiling, while actively digging a grave for your future. I sat there in the dark living room, the glow of the screen illuminating the absolute wreckage of my life. Then, I saw a text message thread backed up to his cloud storage. It was between David and his mother, Martha. "Don't worry about Clara, Mom. I'll keep her distracted with the gala planning until Sarah's shop is fully funded." Martha's reply made the blood freeze in my veins. "Just make sure the lake house is entirely in your name before you file the divorce papers, David. That girl doesn't deserve a single dime of our family's wealth." She knew. She knew absolutely everything. Martha was intentionally forcing me to drain my personal savings to pay $8,000 for her grand anniversary party, all while actively helping her son steal my home. Every cruel comment, every demand for money, it was all part of a calculated strategy to bleed me dry. They were laughing at me behind my back, planning to throw me out on the street the moment the party was over. I didn't cry. The tears simply refused to fall, they were instantly replaced by a burning, suffocating rage. Instead of collapsing, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. They thought I was just a naive girl from the South Side they could easily exploit and discard. They thought I would quietly sink to the bottom of the lake while they sailed away with everything I had built. But they forgot one crucial detail. I was the one holding the checkbook for their precious gala. I closed the laptop, took a deep, steadying breath, and made a promise to myself right then and there. I wasn't just going to leave him. I was going to make sure their perfect, wealthy world burned to the ground. The night of the gala finally arrived. The grand sapphire ballroom was covered in thousands of white roses, completely paid for by my drained savings account. 70 guests were laughing, drinking top-tier champagne, and feasting on filet mignon. And there I sat, wearing a forced smile, watching them celebrate their perfect family legacy with my money. For 2 weeks, I had played the role of the obedient, naive wife perfectly. It was the hardest performance of my entire life. I ironed David's suits. I listened to Martha's endless complaints about the catering. I smiled every time David kissed my forehead and told me he loved me, knowing the entire time that he was plotting to leave me homeless. I sat at the head table, sipping my water, just watching them. David was holding court, laughing with his wealthy uncles, probably bragging about his new business venture. The business funded by my stolen equity. Martha was glowing in a custom silk gown, holding a crystal glass, acting like the Queen of Chicago. Then, the waiters began clearing the dinner plates. It was almost time for the speeches. Martha stood up, tapping a silver spoon against her glass. The entire room fell completely silent. "To family," Martha announced, her voice echoing through the massive ballroom. "To the unbreakable bond of our name, and the legacy we continue to build together. A legacy built on trust, loyalty, and unconditional love." I almost laughed out loud. Loyalty. Trust. She was standing there preaching about family values while actively helping her son steal my home to finance his cousin's boutique. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. And everyone in that room was buying it. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Under the table, out of sight, my hands were perfectly steady. I unlocked my phone. I opened my banking app. With one simple tap, I locked the primary credit card on file for the hotel. Tap. I locked the backup card. Tap. I completely froze the joint checking account, having already legally transferred exactly half of our remaining marital assets into a private account in my name that very morning. David didn't notice a thing. He was too busy smiling at his mother, basking in the fake glory he had purchased with my stolen future. I opened my designer clutch and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. Inside were the highlighted bank transfers to Sarah's business. The printed text messages between him and Martha detailing their exact plan to ruin me. And right on top, the forged second mortgage document with my fake signature clearly circled in bright red ink. I gently placed the envelope directly onto David's empty dinner plate. He finally looked down. He glanced at the envelope, then looked up at me with a confused expression. "What's this, Clara?" he whispered. I didn't answer him. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my expensive champagne in his face. I just looked deep into his eyes for one long, terrifying second. I let him see the absolute emptiness in my stare. And then, I stood up from my chair. Many people mistakenly believe that revenge has to be loud. They think you have to scream, break things, or humiliate your abuser in front of a massive crowd to win. But the absolute highest, most terrifying form of retaliation against toxic people is absolute, permanent silence. When you stop arguing, when you stop providing, and when you refuse to play the role of the emotional punching bag, you instantly cut off their fake life source. In the exact moment I stepped away from that table without saying a single word, I took back every ounce of my power. Their ultimate panic doesn't come from losing your love. It comes from the horrifying realization that their free financial and emotional safety net has completely collapsed forever. You don't need to scream insults at a narcissist. Sometimes, leaving them with an $8,000 bill they cannot pay is the most damning conviction in the world. I turned my back on the head table and started walking. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor. I walked past the massive ice sculpture. I walked past the towering custom cake. I didn't look back once. By the time I reached the grand lobby, my phone was already ringing. It was my best friend, Emma. She was waiting right outside the glass doors with the engine running. I slid into the passenger seat and closed the door. "It's done?" Emma asked softly. "Drive," I replied, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. As we pulled away from the Grand Sapphire, heading into the cool Chicago night, my phone started exploding with notifications. Missed calls from David. Frantic texts from Martha. The hotel manager had just brought out the final invoice for the gala. The primary card had declined. The backup card had declined. And David, the successful businessman who was secretly drowning in debt to fund his mistress, was suddenly surrounded by 70 high society guests and a furious hotel staff. The beautiful web of lies hadn't just unraveled. It had caught fire and burned his entire fake empire to the ground. 12 hours later, the real nightmare finally crashed down on David. When I woke up in the quiet comfort of Emma's apartment, my phone was completely frozen from hundreds of missed calls and frantic text messages. The management at the Grand Sapphire did not back down. They called the police the second David refused to sign the acknowledgement of the $8,000 debt. Right in front of 70 high society guests, the exact same people who had just raised a glass to their fake family legacy, Martha had to sob and beg her relatives to max out their credit cards just to keep her precious son out of the back of a police cruiser. They certainly got an anniversary party they would never forget. But the public humiliation at the gala was only the beginning of his ruin. The very next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office with a calm, peaceful smile on my face. I placed every single piece of evidence I had quietly backed up right on his desk. The shady bank transfers, the calculating text messages between David and his mother, and most importantly, the second mortgage documents with my blatantly forged signature. When we finally walked into the courtroom months later, David's usual arrogant smirk was completely gone. He looked exhausted, shaking and desperate, exactly like a man who just realized his mask had been ripped off in the blinding light. My lawyer absolutely crushed him. The judge was visibly furious at the calculated, silent financial abuse David had put me through. The final ruling was swift and merciless. David was legally forced to assume the entirety of the massive mortgage debt he had secretly taken out on our house. Not only did I get to keep every single penny of the cash I had legally transferred out beforehand, but he was also ordered to pay all of my legal fees and reimburse the joint savings he had stolen. In less than 6 months, their entire illusion of a wealthy, untouchable empire shattered into a million pieces. Sarah's luxury boutique, the business my husband stole my future to fund, was quickly shut down because David no longer had a single dime to keep it running. She actually had the nerve to call me, crying and playing the victim, claiming she was just manipulated by his lies. I didn't say a single word. I just quietly hung up the phone. As for Martha, the woman who constantly paraded her upper-class superiority, she was forced to sell off her diamond jewelry and designer handbags just to help her son make his minimum interest payments every month. They thought they could easily drain my blood and sweat, throw me out on the street, and keep living their perfect life. But in the end, their own bottomless greed and arrogance burned their future to the absolute ground. As for me, I packed up the remnants of a toxic life and left it all behind. I moved away from the cold Chicago winters and relocated to a bright, sunny city on the West Coast. I used my financial freedom to open a small, independent design studio. Now, every single morning, I wake up in my sunlit apartment, brew a fresh cup of coffee, and enjoy the absolute peace of watching the city wake up. There are no more condescending remarks. No more lurking betrayals. No more massive bills to pay for someone else's greed. So many of us are taught this dangerous lie that endless sacrifice and blind submission will eventually earn us love and respect. We convince ourselves that if we just try a little harder, if we just endure the disrespect one more time, the people we love will finally see our worth. But the bitter truth is, to toxic, narcissistic people, your silent endurance is just a green light for them to exploit you even more. The most expensive thing in my marriage wasn't that $8,000 anniversary party. The most expensive thing was my silence, and the years I spent silencing my own intuition. Never shrink your worth just to keep a seat at a table that doesn't respect you. Real love will never require you to destroy your own future to finance someone else's selfishness. If someone treats your sacrifice like a free utility, then your permanent absence is the most devastating punishment you can possibly give them. My name is Clara. And I learned how to build my own kingdom from the ashes of their lies.